Here is section 1 of No Species Survives Contact with Humanity, written in full with a minimum of 700 words. Hashtag section 1. The first contact: hope, curiosity, and miscalculation. The galaxy had long since matured by the time humanity emerged into the stars. Thousands of civilizations had risen and fallen. Stellar empires had formed, warred, and brokered fragile peace treaties, and a loose but persistent galactic concord now stood as a stabilizing force. Every new species discovered was met with a careful, cautious process. Years of linguistic calibration, cultural context building, and respectful observation. The galaxy had learned, through blood and mistakes, the value of patience. Then came the humans. Their arrival wasn't heralded by grand ships or celestial announcements. They emerged quietly, as a scattered cluster of exploratory vessels breaking free of their star system and transmitting wideband pings that ignored every diplomatic standard. Their technology was primitive compared to Concord norms, barely beyond fusion drives, crude quantum communications, and unshielded hulls that wouldn't survive a light solar flare. But what they lacked in technology, they made up for with something the galaxy had not seen in millennia: ruthless initiative. When the Concord's first observation drone reached the outskirts of the Sol system, it was programmed to remain hidden, record, translate, and wait. It didn't get the chance. The humans spotted it, captured it, cracked its encryption in less than 2 Earth weeks, and reprogrammed it to send back a single message to the Concorde. "We see you. Talk." Galactic protocol dictated a minimum 12-month observation period before even responding. The humans, impatient, began launching deep-range scout ships toward the outer edges of the Orion Arm. Some within the Concorde laughed. What could these hairless primates possibly do with their sluggish ships and wild politics? But the laughter stopped with the Tellari incident. The Tellari were designated the official first contact representatives, an aquatic, peaceful species known for their serene diplomacy and encyclopedic understanding of cultural evolution. They were ideal for contact. Their approach was gentle, a ceremonial message, full of art and gesture, welcoming humanity to the galactic fold. In response, humanity launched a diplomatic envoy. But it wasn't a delegation of peace ambassadors or philosophers. It was a convoy of 10 heavily armed ships bearing Terran military crests, emissaries of not just a species, but an entire planetary war culture. The Tellari didn't understand. They responded again, gestures of peace, requests for a delay to coordinate language more effectively. Humanity misread this as evasiveness. They believed the Tellari were hiding something. Within minutes, orbital scans were authorized. When the Tellari refused to grant data access to their planetary network, the humans executed a precision strike on their communication satellites and surface-level AI hubs. The entire Tellari diplomatic complex went dark in 90 seconds. The humans did not see this as an act of war. To them, it was preemptive risk management. Their own history had taught them that hesitation often preceded betrayal. They assumed every species functioned with similar instincts: deception, maneuvering, power consolidation. They weren't trying to destroy the Tellari. They were simply treating them as equals in a game of strategy. To the Concorde, it was butchery, an unprovoked attack on a peaceful civilization. To humanity, it was the beginning of contact. The Tellari incident was quickly followed by a surge of Terran communications, blueprints for collaboration zones, offers for technological integration, and requests for detailed galactic maps. The humans weren't shy. They didn't tiptoe into galactic society. They demanded entry. And when the Concorde hesitated, when diplomatic channels became bogged down in council deliberation, humans did what they had always done. They moved forward anyway. They sent more ships, colonized fringe moons without asking, began strip mining asteroids inside disputed zones. When the Garan trade bloc protested, the humans responded by economically collapsing a Garan colony via rapid trade saturation, flooding the system with Terran goods so cheap and efficient that native industries crumbled. And still they smiled. They sent friendly messages. They offered partnerships and cooperation. They didn't call it invasion. They called it integration. What made them terrifying wasn't the size of their fleet or the power of their weapons. It was their mindset. They operated without fear. They didn't ask, "Can we?" They asked, "Why not?" The Concorde began to understand the problem too late. These weren't conquerors in the traditional sense. They weren't here to enslave or exterminate. They didn't see themselves as evil. They weren't driven by greed or hatred. They simply believed that they had a better way, a faster way, a stronger way, and that if you stood in their path, it was your fault if you fell. And so, the ancient dream of peaceful first contact died. Not in a great battle, not with cries of resistance, but in a quiet, sudden realization that humanity didn't fit into the galactic order. They were here to rewrite it. No species had ever arrived so violently in peace. The Telari were just the first to learn. No species survives contact with humanity. Let me know when you're ready for Section 2.
Certainly.
Here is Section 2 of No Species Survives Contact with Humanity, written in full with a minimum of 700 words. ## Section 2. The Deathworlders, Adaptation, Aggression, and Asymmetry. To understand humanity is to understand Earth, their cradle, and their crucible. The planet itself was an evolutionary meat grinder, tectonically unstable, climatically chaotic, biologically hostile. Plagues, predators, poisonous plants, and unpredictable weather shaped not only the survival of their species, but its very psychology. Earth did not forgive weakness. It taught humans to fight for every inch of ground, to adapt with terrifying speed, and to treat peace, not as a default state, but as a pause between conflicts. To the rest of the galaxy, Earth was a death world, a classification given to only the most violent, unstable planets. Civilizations that emerged from such places were rare and, historically, short-lived. But humanity was the outlier. Not only had they survived their world, they had thrived in it. And they brought that legacy with them to the stars. The first time the Varn Collective attempted to challenge humanity, they did so using traditional tactics. The Varn were a methodical species, bred for hive mind cohesion and battlefield logic. They launched a preemptive blockade around a contested system that humans had begun to mine, deploying gravity mines, sensor scramblers, and a moderate strike fleet. They expected the humans to negotiate, or, at worst, retaliate conventionally. Instead, the humans launched a covert boarding operation using stealth-coded drop pods that landed inside the Varn's flagship, bypassing their outer defenses entirely. Once inside, the human operatives released nanite clouds that dismantled Varn hardware in real time, then hacked the ship's control core and turned it against the fleet. In under 12 hours, the entire Varn task force had either fled, been destroyed, or, worse, been repurposed by the humans into mobile signal hubs. It wasn't just that humanity won the battle. It was how they did it. Unexpectedly, asymmetrically, and with zero regard for the rules of engagement the galaxy had long followed. They used deception, subversion, and technology in ways no other species dared. Where others hesitated to experiment, humans iterated in the field. Where others considered restraint a virtue, humans considered it a liability. When humanity encountered alien technology, they didn't just observe it, they dismantled it, studied it, replicated it. And within days, they improved it. The Varn's gravity mines? Converted into precision-controlled orbital launch platforms. The Telari's fluid translation AI? Refactored and embedded into every Terran communication system. Even the Concorde's vaunted shield harmonics were bypassed using modulated EM interference discovered entirely by accident during a failed mining experiment on Phobos. Humans were not just warriors. They were problem solvers. Every threat they encountered became a puzzle to crack, a system to exploit, a challenge to overcome. And once they solved a problem, they mass-produced the solution, distributed it across fleets, and rendered the previous threat obsolete. To resist humanity was not just to fight a war. It was to enter a battlefield where the enemy evolved in real time. The Rakari learned this the hard way. A proud warrior race with a rigid caste system and a deeply ritualized combat tradition, the Rakari believed they could intimidate the humans by deploying their battle fleets in a symbolic gesture of strength. They occupied the orbit of a neutral system where humans were constructing a supply depot and issued a formal declaration of intent to engage unless the humans withdrew. Instead of retreating, the humans transmitted a genetic model of a bioagent designed specifically for a carry physiology, complete with simulations predicting its spread, effects, and timeline. They released nothing. They didn't need to. The message was the weapon. The Recari backed down. This was psychological warfare at a scale most galactic powers had never considered. Humanity didn't just fight with guns, they fought with ideas, with threats, with reputation. Each victory made them more feared. Each adaptation made them harder to predict. They were fluid where others were rigid, chaotic where others were ordered. But perhaps most unsettling was that humanity didn't seem to hate anyone. They didn't destroy planets out of spite. They didn't enslave populations for pleasure. They were ruthlessly efficient, but rarely cruel. They saw conquest not as domination but as optimization. Their propaganda wasn't even disguised. It was bold, almost arrogant. Asterisk unity through improvement. Asterisk stronger together, faster with us. Asterisk why compromise when you can upgrade? To many alien observers, it became clear humanity didn't want to wipe them out. They wanted to absorb them, to turn every species into a functional part of their grand Terran machine. Some resisted, some surrendered, but most simply adapted because fighting the humans was like fighting gravity. You could delay the fall, but eventually, the weight would pull you down. No species had ever expanded so fast across so many systems with so little infrastructure strain. Where other empires collapsed under the weight of logistics, human colonies thrived. They used modular construction drones, AI-controlled terraforming kits, self-sustaining biodomes, and logistics chains so efficient they made entire Concord supply fleets look primitive. And the more they conquered, the more they learned. Each conflict refined their doctrines. Each enemy became a testbed. No tactic ever worked twice against them because the next time humanity would have already upgraded. The rest of the galaxy began to understand a truth darker than warfare. This wasn't conquest. This was evolution. Asterisk, asterisk. And it was happening faster than anyone could stop. Let me know when you're ready for Section 3.
Certainly.
Here is Section 3 of No Species Survives Contact with Humanity, written in full with a minimum of 700 words. Hashtag Section 3. Collapse of resistance, assimilation, conversion, and cultural erosion. War was never the end goal. That's what made humanity so dangerous. The galaxy had seen conquerors before, empires that rose and fell in violent flames, consuming systems only to collapse beneath the weight of hubris, overreach, or rebellion. But humanity was different. They did not burn planets to cinders. They did not demand submission under banners or deities. Instead, they arrived, assessed, and offered something far more seductive than domination: efficiency. After the initial shockwaves of conquest rippled through the outer systems, something unexpected began to happen. Entire species, even those untouched by direct conflict, began voluntarily aligning with the Terran expansion. It started with the smaller civilizations, those too weak to resist, too fractured to form meaningful defense coalitions. Human envoys arrived not with ultimatums, but with offers. Blueprints for automated food production, self-replicating infrastructure kits, environmental stabilizers that could purify oceans and skies in months. In return, all they asked for was integration, adoption of Terran standard systems, willingness to open cultural and data networks, and the implementation of civilizational optimization metrics. It was a subtle invasion, one of administration, systems, and language. The Jurati, once a proud spiritual civilization, prided themselves on slow governance. Councils of elders meditated for years before policy shifts. To them, history was a living story, not a series of decisions. But when their youth, growing restless in a decaying system, began connecting to Terran learning nets and seeing the pace of life outside, a schism formed. Within a generation, Jurati cities were filled with neon-lit data temples, half spiritual, half technological. Their temples, once sacred places of stillness, now hosted quantum processors beneath domes of prayer. Their gods weren't erased, but they were rebranded. Terran's psychological models classified their deities as Jungian archetypes. Worship became meditative data structuring. The elders protested, but their voices were drowned by the hum of progress. It wasn't that humanity erased alien cultures with fire and steel. That would have triggered resistance. Instead, they did something worse. They overrode identity with utility. Language was one of the first victims. Terran Standard became the lingua franca of interstellar communication. It was embedded into every translator, broadcast, and education system. Alien dialects weren't banned, but slowly faded from official use. A child growing up on a hybrid Terranalary colony might still hear their native tongue at home, but every institution, from banking to healthcare, functioned in Terran terms. Then came architecture. Human design philosophy emphasized function, modularity, and ease of expansion. It was cheap, scalable, and AI-optimized. Why build elaborate stone towers worshipping ancient gods when you could 3D print a habitat in 36 hours with weather control, adaptive lighting, and emergency AI response? Cities began to look the same. Skyscrapers curved like Terran megastructures. Roads followed human logic grids. Statues of alien heroes were replaced by dynamic holoplaques promoting unity and innovation. To many, this was improvement. To others, it was cultural extinction by convenience. Entire educational systems were rewritten. Terran history, full of revolutions, wars, philosophies, and scientific breakthroughs, was taught alongside, and soon over, native history. Children could name Earth's world wars, but struggled to recall the wars of their own ancestors. Shakespeare was translated into a dozen alien tongues. The philosophies of Terran thinkers, Nietzsche, Sun Tzu, Asimov, were treated as universal truths. Who could resist the elegance of human logic when their own texts remained disorganized, untranslated, or mired in outdated paradigms? In time, even biology began to shift. Terran genetic medicine became widely available. It could fix congenital defects, boost immune response, and extend lifespan by decades. But it came at a cost: genetic standardization. Species began undergoing minor tweaks, improved oxygen absorption, better night vision, altered muscle density. Health upgrades, they called them. But each upgrade brought them closer to the Terran norm. Some went further. Cosmetic changes became a trend, aliens opting for human-like features to better fit in with the dominant culture. Teeth reshaped for Terran cuisine. Hands adjusted for Terran tools. Eyes retuned to human light spectrums. Over generations, the distinctiveness of species blurred. The greatest tragedy was that none of it felt like conquest. It felt like evolution. No battles were fought. No blood spilled in the streets. Just millions of quiet decisions, one after another, until the old ways were gone. The Concord, what remained of it, attempted to rally resistance. But they were outmatched not militarily but culturally. Their calls for preservation were met with apathy. Their appeals to history sounded like superstition. Some member species defected entirely, choosing Terran integration over Concord allegiance. Resistance did exist, but it was scattered, disorganized. Underground networks called preservation cells attempted to keep traditions alive in secret. Songs were sung in forbidden languages. Art styles banned from Terran standards were painted in caves and storage vaults. A few historians risked execution by building secret archives of pre-Terran knowledge. But the tide was too strong. For every defiant poet, there were 100 who chose comfort. For every rebel teacher, there were thousands who chose Terran schools for their children. The humans didn't need to destroy cultures. They simply made theirs irresistible. And in that seductive march toward efficiency, the galaxy began to forget itself. Monuments crumbled. Festivals faded. Ancient tongues were lost. The great mosaic of interstellar life was being ground into a single, perfect mirror, reflecting only Earth. Humanity had won not with force, but with a far more terrifying weapon: relevance. And in the end, no species survives contact with humanity, because they all become human. Let me know when you're ready for Section 4. Absolutely. Here is Section 4 of No Species Survives Contact with Humanity, written in full with a minimum of 700 words. Hashtag Section 4. The New Order, Legacy, Warning, and the Fate of the Galaxy. Centuries passed. What began as a turbulent expansion became the settled rhythm of a galaxy remade. Humanity was no longer one species among many. It was the template, the blueprint, the standard against which all others were measured. The Terran sphere now spanned thousands of systems. Hundreds of former alien civilizations, once sovereign and distinct, now functioned as semi-autonomous regions within a vast, tightly controlled network of planetary governments, each regulated by the Terran interstellar bureaucracy. There were no wars, no resistance movements of any scale. Piracy was extinct. Famine and disease were relics. The stars themselves had been harnessed, their power distributed evenly by Dyson-linked grids that ensured every world received energy, data, and governance with mechanical precision. To most, it was paradise. And yet, there was a silence, a tension, a stillness at the edge of perfection that couldn't be ignored. In the heart of the capital world of Nova Terra, once known as Earth, massive towers of obsidian alloy rose toward a sky of controlled weather patterns. Everything shimmered with a clinical beauty, neither ugly nor breathtaking, merely optimized. In these spires, post-human administrators, fused with machine minds and advanced neural links, oversaw the daily maintenance of civilization. Data flowed like blood through the veins of the sphere. But what they rarely spoke of, what they barely allowed themselves to consider, was meaning. Humanity had achieved everything it set out to do. Peace, order, growth, efficiency. Yet, increasingly, whispers emerged. Not of rebellion, but of existential doubt. Across the sphere, a movement began to stir, the preservationists. They didn't carry weapons. They didn't bomb data centers or sabotage infrastructure. Their revolution was quiet, almost mournful. They built hidden museums, wrote forbidden poems, studied extinct languages, wore the clothes their ancestors wore, rough, ill-fitting, inefficient. They resisted not with violence, but with memory. One of the founders of this movement, a Terran-born anthropologist named Dr. Kale Mirren, published a dangerous treatise, The Homogenized Galaxy. It traced how, over just 4 centuries, humanity had erased 78% of known cultural frameworks, 93% of pre-contact languages, and over 2,000 unique architectural styles. What's worse, it wasn't intentional. It had happened through what Kale called systemic gravitational dominance, a pulse so strong that other cultures collapsed inward, unable to sustain their identity in the face of Terran relevance. The core argument? Humanity had not merely defeated its rivals. It had replaced the entire galactic possibility space with itself. Even among humans, the weight of their legacy had become unbearable. The last great enemy had been time. And they had conquered that, too. Life extension therapies, consciousness duplication, and neural backups ensured immortality for the elite and centuries of vitality for all. But in victory came emptiness. The post-humans, enhanced in every measurable way, began to forget why they had wanted to win in the first place. What was left when every mystery had been solved? The stars held no more secrets. Artificial intelligences ran simulations of all possible outcomes across civilizations. The sphere knew how every species would act, react, vote, and behave before they even made the decision. There were no surprises, no mistakes, no chaos, no soul. Some began to argue, in hushed rooms and encrypted forums, that the galaxy had not merely been tamed, it had been flattened. That diversity had been the true strength of the galaxy, and in unifying everything, humanity had committed the ultimate act of violence, the killing of potential. One AI, codenamed Sybil 9, a sentient city core from the former Kalari cluster, became infamous for its final transmission before termination. The greatest threat to the future of the galaxy is the past refusing to die. The second greatest is that it finally has. It was a paradox the sphere could not resolve. They had built a civilization immune to entropy, to rebellion, to internal collapse. And yet it was brittle. Not because it was weak, but because it was complete. There was no place left to grow. Perfection had become a prison. And so, small fractures began to form, not just in the outlying systems, but in the very minds of the post-humans themselves. Doubt crept in. Children asked questions. Why are all cities the same? Why do we speak only one tongue? Why do the statues of alien ancestors all carry Terran faces? They searched the archives for stories, not just data. And what they found were ghosts. Cultures that had once soared across the stars with wild philosophies, unique aesthetics, strange rituals, and alien dreams. All gone. Not by genocide, but by absorption. By the quiet suffocation of relevance. In that realization lay the cruelest irony of all. Humanity had sought to survive. And in doing so, it ensured that no one else ever truly would. Because to survive contact with humanity is to become it. And in that transformation, everything that was other, everything that was unique, dies not in fire, but in applause. They will tell stories. They will show museums. They will simulate extinct cultures. But it will all be curated, sterilized, safe. Nothing wild will remain. Nothing unexpected. And perhaps, someday, in the deepest silence of a well-ordered world, some future mind will whisper a heresy. We should never have left Earth. Because sometimes, extinction doesn't look like death. Sometimes, extinction wears a smiling face and speaks your name in your own voice until it becomes the only voice left. No species survives contact with humanity, not because they are destroyed, but because in time, they forget they were ever anything else. Let me know if you'd like this compiled into a full document, narrated script, or formatted for publishing, e.g., blog, video, ebook.